century has had to confront the fateful decision to send Americans into combat. I do not relish this prospect, but neither do I shrink from it. I know we must have the resolve constantly to deter, sometimes to fight, and always. That is why Al Gore and I supported the decision to use force to get Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait, and why we stand united with President Bush in sending the message to Saddam as he flouts the UN's resolutions, toe the line, or face the music. Whatever the threat or opportunity, national security is and must remain a bipartisan task. As a nation, we have many opinions, but only one foreign policy. Yet presidential elections are, as I said at the beginning, about choices. And the choices the American people must make this year revolve around the kind of presidential leadership we want in a fundamentally new era. In this election, Mr. Bush will seek to establish his leadership by emphasizing the time he's spent, the calls he's placed, the trips he's taken in the conduct of foreign policy. But the measure of leadership in this new era is not the conversation held or the miles traveled. It is the new realities recognized, the crises averted, the opportunities seized. In the next 82 days, I challenge him to set his vision of our nation's purpose in a dramatically new era against the one I am presenting in this campaign. For in the final analysis, we must have a president ready to think anew in a world that is new. It is time for leadership that is strategic, vigorous, and grounded in our democratic values, not reactive and tied to a status quo that cannot prevail. In 1960, John Kennedy told America that there was a new world to be won. Today, there is again a new world to be won. My vision is of a world united in peaceful commerce, a world in which nations compete more in economic and less in military terms, a world of dynamic, market-generated growth that narrows the gap between rich and poor, a world increasingly engaged in democracy, tolerant of diversity and respectful of human rights, united against the common enemies of mankind, war, poverty, ignorance, disease, and environmental destruction. A world we can be proud to pass on to our children and their children with the knowledge that we rose to new responsibilities in our world, in our age. I am running for president because I believe that a strong America, strong in arms, strong in values, strong in wealth, strong in will, remains the world's best hope for turning that vision into a reality. Thank you very much.
Governor Clinton speaking yesterday in Los Angeles. We now discuss that speech with two foreign policy experts representing the competing presidential campaigns. Condoleezza Rice was Special Assistant for National Security Affairs to President Bush the first 2.5 years of his administration. She's now a professor of political science at Stanford and also a California delegate to next week's Republican convention in Houston. She joins us from the Houston Astrodome. Michael Mandelbaum is a foreign policy advisor to Governor Clinton. He's a professor of political science at the Johns Hopkins School for Advanced International Studies in Washington and director of the Project on East-West Relations at the Council on Foreign Relations. He joins us from Los Angeles. Mr. Mandelbaum, what do you think let's just separate two things in this speech. As clearly, the governor is saying two things. One is that the Bush leadership is not as great as it's claimed to be, and the other is that he, Clinton, has a better vision for the future. Let's discuss first the attack on the critique of the Bush leadership. What do you think that critique has achieved?
Well, I don't know what the politics are, but it seems to me that it is the right and duty of the opposition party to point out the flaws in the incumbent's presentation of himself. As Governor Clinton said, Mr. Bush's effort to claim credit for the collapse of communism is like the rooster claiming credit for the dawn and does a disservice to the brave men and women led by the Boris Yeltsins and Václav Havels and Lech Wałęsas, who were the foot soldiers in the war that ultimately overthrew communist tyranny. But that's important for the future as well. Mr. Bush did not provide the kind of moral support and world leadership for the forces of freedom that he should have during the period when communism was collapsing. And in the post-Cold War era, it is even more important to gear our policy, as Governor Clinton said yesterday, to the support of democracies. They need technical support, they need moral support, they need economic support. They're not getting that kind of support from us, and one reason is one of the principal themes of Governor Clinton's speech and one of the principal themes of his foreign policy. We have got to do something about our economy here at home so that we can project our power and influence onto the world stage. We won't be strong abroad unless we're strong at home. And now, because of our anemic economy, because of the worst economic performance in 60 years, just at a time when the world needs American leadership more than ever, we are unable to provide it.
Ms. Rice, back to the point of Clinton's critique of the president's leadership. Do you think Clinton has revealed flaws in the president's leadership in foreign affairs?
I think what Bill Clinton has revealed is that the Democratic view of the last 4 years, which is that, as the Democratic platform says, it has been a nightmare, simply doesn't accord with the real world. The fact of the matter is there are free countries all over East Central Europe now. The Soviet Union has broken up peacefully. Germany is reunified. A whole host of democratic forces have won, and all that the Democrats can talk about is some set of flaws in a policy that helped to lead to this. I just want to make one thing very clear. This idea that somehow President Bush wishes to diminish the contributions of Lech Walesa and Boris Yeltsin and the other foot soldiers of democracy is purely ludicrous. The point of view is that those people on the front lines were, in fact, the important element in this, but that it was in conjunction with American and Western leadership and, indeed, American strength that they were able to triumph. No one wishes to diminish the role of those great leaders.
Mr. Mandelbaum, Clinton says Bush should have embraced Yeltsin sooner, should not have discouraged Ukrainian independence, just to take two examples of the critique. What harm flowed from the president's caution in those two situations?
Fortunately, ultimately, no harm came of it because of the courage of Boris Yeltsin and the public pressure from the American people. But if you look back at Mr. Bush's response to the coup against Boris Yeltsin and primarily against Mikhail Gorbachev in August of 1991, you'll see that his first response was to say that Gennady Yanayev, the vice president who was the front man for the forces of darkness, the old order that wished to push aside Mikhail Gorbachev and murder Boris Yeltsin, the only freely elected president in Russian history, Mr. Bush's first response was that Mr. Yanayev was a reformer. It was only after the people of Moscow resisted this coup that the president was persuaded to change his mind. Now, Mr. Yanayev is a communist hack. He's a man who, as I say, was fronting for the worst elements in the Soviet Union, trying to turn back the clock on democracy and restore the old order. If Mr. Yanayev is a reformer, I wonder what Mr. Bush's definition of a thug is.
So you're saying that the points that Yeltsin, not embracing Yeltsin sooner, staying with Gorbachev as long as he did, and going and discouraging Ukrainian independence, that in the end, and the way things have turned out, they really didn't matter very much. Is that?
They didn't matter in overthrowing communism, but his timidity, his lack of leadership, and above all, the terrible condition of the American economy, which makes us unable to lead a Western effort to give economic support to the Democrats and reformers in formerly communist Europe, does imperil the great democratic promise of their revolution. The Russian reformers, the Russian Democrats, Mr. Yeltsin are in serious trouble today, in part because they are not getting the assistance from the West that we should be providing. And we are not providing that assistance because we're broke. We cannot get a consensus in favor of this aid, despite Governor Clinton's leadership on the subject, because we have, under Mr. Bush, the worst economic performance in 60 years. And that has crippled American leadership in the world just when the world really needs it.
Ms. Rice, that's a point made by quite a lot of commentators these days. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think first we have to respond to the rewriting of the history of the August coup. The fact of the matter is, as no less an authority than Boris Yeltsin himself has said, President Bush was the first to recognize what the Russian people were doing. He was the one, when many other world leaders were hesitating, who said coups don't always succeed. He was the one who called Boris Yeltsin. He was, by the way, one of the first people that Boris Yeltsin and Gorbachev called after it was over. Clearly, they thought his role was very instrumental. I'd also like to respond to the notion that somehow the president didn't respond to Yeltsin in time. There's another interpretation to the argument that we did no harm, and that is that we did some good by the timing of the response to Yeltsin. I'd really like to hear Governor Clinton answer the question, because it's always a matter of a utopian world in which you don't have to make hard choices with Bill Clinton. I'd like him to tell us when he would have pulled support from Gorbachev. Would he have done it when the Soviets held a veto on German unification? Would he have done it when the Soviets held the veto in the Security Council against the coalition against Saddam Hussein? Would he have done it when Boris Yeltsin himself was calling for the return of Gorbachev after the August coup? No, I think that the Democrats, either because they haven't practiced policy in a long time, or because they simply don't understand the conditions of these democratic forces, don't seem to understand that sometimes you have to make hard choices about timing, and that choices about timing in the case of the Soviet Union were just right. Finally, the notion that we have not aided Russian democracy and the democracies of the former Soviet Union is simply not right. There's a $24 billion package, an IMF-led package, but one to which all of the major countries of the G7 are going to contribute, waiting to help the Russians and the other former states of the Soviet Union reform their economies. But we were under a lot of pressure at one time to dump a lot of money on an unreformed Soviet economy. That would have repeated the mistakes that we made with Poland in the early 70s when we dumped money on an unreformed economy, and the Poles ended up $40 billion in debt and no better off. Timing is everything in international politics, and in following the reforms of the former Soviet Union, it is critical that Western aid be tied to the stage of reform, not just throw money at the problem.
Mr. Mandelbaum, turning to the future, how is Clinton's vision of the new era clearer and more realistic than Mr. Bush's?
Well, I'm not aware that Mr. Bush has presented a vision of the new era. Perhaps he'll do that at Houston. But Governor Clinton's vision, as presented in Los Angeles and in two major foreign policy addresses before that, has three important components. First, we cannot be strong abroad unless we are strong at home. Unless we do something to revive economic growth, our influence in the world, our capacity to shape events will continue to fade. Second, with the end of the Cold War and the collapse of communism, we need a new focus for American foreign policy. And that focus, in Governor Clinton's view, ought to be democracy. We ought to be willing to say loud and clear with no ambiguity that we stand for freedom. And not only has Governor Clinton said that hypothetically and generally, he said it specifically. There is a communist dictatorship in power in Beijing. Mr. Bush embraces it. Mr. Clinton has distanced himself from it and has criticized it. Third, Governor Clinton has said, and went into some detail in his Los Angeles address, that in the wake of the Cold War, we need to reconfigure our military forces. The Bush policy is to keep in place, to keep in being a smaller version of the forces that we fielded to try to stop a Soviet attack launched from East Germany against our Western European allies. Well, the Soviet Union doesn't exist. The Warsaw Pact doesn't exist. Eastern Europe is liberated. There is no East Germany. That threat has evaporated. As Governor Clinton said, we face other threats. Saddam Hussein's around the world, terrorism, nuclear proliferation. And we need new military forces to cope with those threats. Those forces will largely be based in the United States, and therefore they have to be mobile, and they have to be smart. And he's made specific proposals for what we need to do to get those kinds of forces to meet the challenge of the post-Cold War world.
Ms. Rice, how does President Bush's vision differ from that?
Well, the interesting thing is, and let me start in reverse order, on defense, what Bill Clinton is describing is, in fact, the American Volunteer Army as it exists today. It is the most mobile force in the world. It is the most maneuverable force in the world. It is the technologically most sophisticated force in the world. And indeed, it was created to fight a war in Europe. But let's remember that it fought a war against Saddam Hussein very successfully. So perhaps this notion that there's one kind of army to fight wars against Saddam Hussein and another kind of army that we now have is we'd better look at that a little bit more closely. Secondly, on the economic side, I think that the governor's speech tended to expose some either misunderstanding of international trade, or perhaps it's a misunderstanding. There's a comment that we have to be strong at home and then we have to pursue markets abroad. There is no strategy for linking those two. He talks about free trade, he talks about free markets, but it is the president that has created the largest single integrated market in the world in the North American Free Trade Zone. That, by the way, is an initiative that began early in the Bush administration. Secretary Baker talked about doing that in other places in Asia, possibly even with the newly marketizing states of Eastern Europe. And Governor Clinton said something about our not being able to deliver in the GATT because of our weakness. We haven't delivered in the GATT yet because the president has been unwilling to undergo and to take on French subsidies. He's taken on French subsidies. French farmers are the problem in the GATT, not American weakness.
All right. Well, we've used up our time. We could obviously go on a great deal longer. Mr. Mandelbaum and Ms. Rice, thank you both for joining us. Judy?
Still ahead on the NewsHour, politics with Gergen and Shields and an essay about Los Angeles. It's Friday, and that means it is time for political analysis with our team of Gergen and Shields. That's David Gergen, editor-at-large at U.S. News & World Report, and syndicated columnist Mark Shields, who's in Houston at the Astrodome. Let's start out with you, Mark. You've been listening to some of this discussion about Bill Clinton's foreign policy. Can he really help himself talking about foreign policy and defense policy a great deal during this campaign?
I think it's an attempt, and rather a bold and interesting attempt on Clinton's part, at a time when the Bush quail campaign is at an all-time low and seems to be in a state of certainly flux, if not disarray, to try and use that opportunity to shore up what is a real weakness. And the governor of Arkansas, whoever the governor of any state, whether it's the governor of New York, has very limited credentials in foreign policy or defense policy. And this, because of the primary season, as well, and the charges against Bill Clinton because of draft evasion during the Vietnam War, is a particularly dicey area for him. But I think it's rather bold on his part to address it, to try and meet it frontally, and really to catch the Republicans when very few people, with the exception of Dr. Rice, are there to rebut him.
Well, do you think he can score any points on any aspect of foreign or defense policy? Mark?
I'm sorry, Judy.
Oh.
I lost you. Pardon me.
That's all right.
Do I think he can score points on foreign policy?
Yeah, do you think he can score any points? You were saying it's a weakness for him.
I think the argument that he and Michael Mandelbaum make is an interesting one. I think it's appealing that America is only as strong internationally as it is at home. And if America is not strong and vibrant and robust economically, and our people are not optimistic and outward-looking, then we will not be as effective and influential in the world. I think that's a strong argument. It's an argument that was made by Democrats in the Congress the last time in 1988. It didn't seem to catch then, but I think now, given the bleak and dismal economic picture in the country, it has a greater resonance in the nation.
What do you think, David? Can the Democrats score on foreign policy in 1992?
Not very much, and I don't think that the Clinton speech yesterday was anything more than a footnote in this campaign. What it has helped us to understand is that both candidates
We just
now
spent 12 minutes
well, it was important.
putting it on the air.
It's important to see it, and I think that to hear the debate, but I think in terms of its political impact, whether it will move voters or not,
Sure.
I think it's a footnote. I think it has helped us to see, too, that both candidates have very effective advocates in Condi Rice and Michael Mandelbaum. But, Judy, I think in this situation, what a candidate is doing, I disagree with Mark. I don't think this is a bold attempt by Bill Clinton. I think it's a defensive effort. I think it's essentially one to give himself some protective coating in an area where he is vulnerable, but he does not have the experience, and to establish some credentials. I don't think yesterday's speech was particularly effective. I think he did give some earlier speeches which were helpful. I thought his move on Bosnia a few weeks ago was very helpful. Remember, that's when he said the president ought to seek authority from the United Nations to use force. The White House came out and criticized him as being reckless, and 10 days later the White House embraced that very policy. So I think on that issue he did well, but I think this is essentially to get protective coding.
While we're still on the Democrats, Mark, is this week been a sort of neither up or down for them? The polls are showing that they're still, 25 points ahead of President Bush?
I think it's been a down week for the Republicans, Judy, and with a two-way race as opposed to our three-way race of just 5 weeks ago. It's now it's a seesaw. If candidate A goes down, then candidate B prospers, and Bill Clinton is candidate B, and he's doing very well because George Bush is doing very well. George Bush had a tough week. He had a major announcement about peace and progress with Prime Minister Rabin at his home at Kennebunkport, and he stepped on his own story his own story was stepped on, I guess, by allegations about...
Okay, Mark, I want to get to the Republicans in just a second. I was really asking about the Democrats. Do you think they helped themselves this week, or was it kind of a wash for them, or what?
Well, anytime you're 25 points ahead going in the other guy's convention, Judy, that we expected to drop, they didn't. Based upon my conversations with Republicans in Houston and elsewhere, it's been a good week for the Democrats.
David?
I think it's been a reasonable week for the Democrats. There is a trickle now of some voters back to the Republicans, but it's not a flood. I mean, a month ago after the convention in a Washington Post ABC poll, Clinton was ahead by 28 points. In the most recent poll, he's now ahead by 26. Bush gained 2 points in a month. At this rate, he would win. Bush would win if the election were held in 1994. But he needs to move a little faster than this. I think he'll get more. He'll show more progress in the next 10 days. Those next 10 days are really crucial for the Republicans.
All right, and speaking of the Republicans, we want to talk about them now. In their rush to defuse the politically explosive abortion issue before the convention, they sent out some mixed signals this week. In an interview on NBC, the president was asked what he would do if one of his granddaughters came to him and said she wanted an abortion. He said he would try to talk her out of it, but in the end, the choice would be hers to make, and he would support her. That contrasted with a much tougher statement the president delivered last week to the Knights of Columbus in New York City.
There's a national tragedy, more than 500,000 abortions in this country every year, and we know there's got to be a better way. Human alternatives like adoptions and abstinence. 7 times I have ignored the polls and acted on what I believe is fundamental principle and vetoed abortion legislation. And I promise you again today, no matter the political price, they tell me in this year that it's enormous, I am going to do what I think is right. I'm going to stand on my conscience and let my conscience be my guide when it comes to matters of life.
That was last week. Yesterday, in an interview with U.S. News and World Report, Time, and Newsweek magazines, Barbara Bush weighed in on the anti-abortion plank in the 1992 Republican platform. To quote her, "I'm not being outspoken, pro or con on abortion. I'm saying abortion should not be in there, either pro or con." Question: so issues of abortion or homosexuality, those kinds of issues are issues of personal preference? Mrs. Bush, indeed they are. Question: are issues that a family should decide and a government doesn't? Mrs. Bush, I don't think a family should decide. I think that it's a personal choice is what I'm saying. Personal thing. The personal thing should be left out of, in my opinion, out of platforms and conventions. Later, in another round of interviews, a reporter said that her comments were being interpreted in some quarters as pro-abortion rights. Mrs. Bush paused, and her reply was a single word: really? David Gergen, what's going on here?
I think this is very striking. Barbara Bush has been asked that question hundreds of times as First Lady and before, and she's always said, I'm not getting into it. And now she's waded into the middle of it. Also this week, she criticized, just in the last couple of days, the Republican National Committee chairman for attacking Hillary Clinton. She said he shouldn't have done that. She stepped into it again. She does not do that. I don't know why. Barbara Bush keeps her own counsel on this. It suggests to me that she's frustrated with the campaign. She's angry about some of the things that are happening. She wants the campaign to get back on track so her husband can be reelected. Also got to appreciating the situation. Barbara Bush is the icon of this campaign. Everybody, she's the most popular person on the Bush side by far. Her popularity is twice that of the president's right now. She has enormous stature. She's going to be speaking at the convention. And I think she's trying to tell the boys around the president, shape up, fellows. I don't want to lose this, and you're in the process of losing this for my husband, and I don't like it. I'm impressed with it. She's stepping up this way.
Well, Mark, is there something more behind it? Bill Clinton said today, well, you know, these Republicans are trying to have it both ways on abortion.
Well, I think there is, David's right. Barbara Bush has been asked this question hundreds of times. She's always deftly sidestepped it in the past, Judy. The fact that she says something in the summer of 1992, the day after the Republican Party has reaffirmed its abortion position, an abortion position which, interestingly enough, has not prevented their winning 3 consecutive landslide victories in the past, but they're obviously nervous about it in 1992. She picks that day to sort of send a wink and a nudge of a message that you do, if you are worried about the pro-life position of the party, you have a friend in court, you have an ally on the presidential pillow. And I think that was the message to me. It was a definite political, tactical move.
Is it a smart move, David?
I think it's a smart move on her part, and I think people will welcome the fact that she's speaking out.
But were you saying a moment ago, this is Barbara Bush speaking on her own, or is there something is there some orchestration involved?
Well, let me just say this. There's nobody in this campaign that I know of who can go to Barbara Bush and get her to do anything. This is a woman who speaks her own mind, and I think I think she made the decision to do it, but I do not believe that a campaign group went and got her to do anything. That's not the way this campaign or any campaign treats Barbara Bush. She's a very, very strong woman in her own right. I do think, Judy, that she may be concerned that in these platform hearings, the party drifted over and began to embrace a lot of socially conservative positions that will energize the conservative base. And by golly, they sure need to do that and energize their own base, because it's been a very unenthusiastic group of people. But in doing that, they have positioned her husband and the party in a way that will make it more difficult to win the election rather than less difficult. The more you embrace these positions over on the right, on the social side, the more difficult it is to get to 51% in terms of winning the election.
You agree with that, Mark?
Well, I agree with it, Judy. The Republicans have won the presidency essentially running on 3 separate values that all work together. The Republicans were the anti-tax party in the past and the party of economic growth. They are no longer the party of economic growth in 1992, and George Bush broke his word on taxes. The Republicans were the party of strength, improved by their support of national defense and for an aggressive policy against the Soviet expansionism. That is no longer there. That test of America's strength in terms of defense expenditures or an aggressive foreign policy. Finally, it was on traditional values, and this is where the Republicans have stood in the past. I do think that the leadership of both parties are quite nervous about abortion as an issue. I think the Democrats are to the left of America on abortion, and the Republicans are to the right. Americans are generally troubled by the issue. They are basically pro-choice, but they're anti-abortion. Dr. Sam Popkin, the California political scientist, was an advisor to Bill Clinton, put it at one point, he said, Americans want to put abortion in a brown wrapper. They don't want it readily available. They don't want it promoted. They don't want it advertised, but they don't want to say it shouldn't be available. And I think that's why Bill Clinton says, I'm pro-choice, which means doesn't mean I'm pro-abortion, and why Barbara Bush is sending these little tactical smoke signals.
But to add to that, Judy, I think what happened here is that Dan Quayle has been right. The Democrats imposed a litmus test on abortion. The Republicans had an opportunity to say, look, we are against abortion, but we're also a party that tolerates views.
Our tent's bigger than that.
Our tent's bigger than that. They had that opportunity, and they decided not to take it. And I think that by my lights, that was a mistake. The other mistake, though, was to let abortion and the social issues dominate the economic issues. The way they're going to win this election is prove they're once again the party of economic growth. You're
talking about the Republicans.
Yes, the Republicans, and they need to move on the economic growth issue. That's the big test of this acceptance address right now for the president, and they're not ready right now to hit the ball out of the park on the acceptance address.
Is that your impression, Mark? You're out there in Houston.
Well, it's tough to run on economic growth unless you're going to inject the American people with amnesia as a national virus in the next 48 hours. I mean, you've got to go with what works for you, and economic growth is not something that people associate with George Bush. David is right. The Democrats had one litmus test at New York, and that was abortion. Here's Bill Clinton nominated as a pro-capital punishment, pro-right-to-work governor, which nobody ever mentioned. And so I think that it's interesting that we are in an argument at the Republican convention about social issues. George Bush, that isn't his task here. His task here is he has to put in context and definition his first term, what it meant, and why the second term is going to be better, and he better define that future.
To go from the macro to the micro, some would say, David, what is the legacy, if any, of this story earlier this week, the New York Post story that the president allegedly had some romantic involvement with a woman who was formerly an aide of his? Are we going to hear any more about that now?
I'm not sure. Well, you never know when these things are going to pop up and what tabloid is going to drag us into these again, drag the mainstream press in. If we avoided it in the press, we'd be better off. But in any event, I think that it did do some damage to the president. Not a lot, but I think it damaged in this sense. This was a very, very good issue about trust. Can you trust Bill Clinton before? What is his private life like? To a degree, this has helped to neutralize it. I think the Republicans think it's extraordinarily unfair. Mrs. Bush has been outspoken in her views about this week. They feel there's been no evidence there to support these allegations, and yet the president was persistently asked about it. But nonetheless, the political impact, I think, to be objective about it, I think the political impact is that it's blunted the issue somewhat, and Republicans no longer have quite the edge they had before.
Level the playing field, as they say, Mark? Is that what's happening?
I think David's right, Judy, that it makes it a little bit tougher for the Republicans to run under the banner of family values and family virtue when charges like this are about. But I don't think the Clinton campaign wants the focus of the press or the public recycled and redirected into personal behavior.
All right, Mark, we've got less than 30 seconds. What's the weather like in Houston?
I'd say, I think Philip Sheridan once said about another place, if I owned hell in Houston, I'd rent out Houston and live in hell. I mean, it is really hot. Everybody's wonderful, they're lovely and hospitable, and they're ready for the convention, but it's a hot place.
Well, thanks for the preview, Mark, and we'll see you next week. Mark and David, thank you both.
We close tonight with an essay. Richard Rodriguez, an editor for the Pacific News Service, thinks a great American city may be returning to its roots.
This summer, something seems different about Los Angeles, about this city that has given America so many of our dreams. A few months after the riots of spring, you can still see Mexican boys along Sunset Boulevard, selling maps to the homes of the stars. But Los Angeles seems now a city without a sense of itself, without a true myth. For generations, this city was famous for its internal immigrants. The myth of LA was constructed by Americans from the Midwest, by Okies, by the sons and daughters of the East Coast. Los Angeles became famous for its Iowa Day picnics, and its most influential dreamers were Jews from Brooklyn, sons of immigrants who imagined movies, dreams 40 feet tall. In the American myth of Los Angeles, you can become someone new in LA. Dye your hair, get a divorce, change your father's name, become a movie star. The American myth of LA was constructed on the belief that you could be free of memory. Here was the great second chance American city. In Los Angeles, you could have your own lawn, your own car. There was space enough and sunshine enough to sustain the ambition. The city was childish. In LA, grandmothers rode roller skates. East Coast grandmothers didn't even speak English. The Los Angeles that amused the rest of the country was laid back, far out, the city on the coast, which is to say, at the edge of possibility. What is dying in Los Angeles is some dream of American youth, the dream of a softer winter, the optimism that kept the child of immigrant parents in Cleveland up late at night imagining a palm tree villa or a long white car. All summer, people have been tense. Dark voices have predicted new violence. People say parking downtown has never been easier. Fewer people must be driving downtown. On Rodeo Drive in the fancy stores, shopkeepers worry that the Japanese tourists are staying away. Yet the dream factories pretend that nothing has changed. This summer on Fox Television, the same TV producer who gave us Beverly Hills 90210 gave America a new program called Melrose Place, which purports to be about an apartment house in West Hollywood. The occupants are all young. Everyone is white, of course, except for a black aerobics instructor. And in this version of Los Angeles, no one has an accent.
But in truth, Los Angeles is an old Mexican city. This city was founded in 18th century Spanish in honor of the Virgin Mary, Queen of the Angels, Reina de los Angeles. With typical disdain for the past, people here simply refer to L.A. Yet Mexicans, hundreds of thousands and millions, have lived in the city. Mexicans did not define Los Angeles for America, however. They did not define the myth. It was not until the late 1970s that people in L.A. began to notice a change. Then the city seemed no longer so accentless or so American. The city began crowding with immigrants from Asia and Latin America. And there were billboards and neon signs in other languages, and Syrian names in the phone books, and the cab driver was from Russia. In the 1980s, city officials tried optimistically to declare Los Angeles the Pacific Rim capital. But in those same years, people in town started complaining. The city was getting too crowded, traffic was bad, people wanted out of LA. And now in the 90s, there have been the fires of spring. There are no simple black and white solutions to riots where the largest number of persons arrested on the night of Black Rage were Hispanic. Riots in which Korean-owned businesses were targets. This summer, the theme at City Hall is Rebuild LA. In parts of the city, one hears grumbling about the fact that the black mayor has turned to a white man to rebuild LA. But I like what a counselor at the Korean Youth Center told me the other day. Rebuild LA, what an idea. People at City Hall should be talking about building LA. Along the boardwalk in Venice Beach, people still dress up on weekends to do their own thing. And you can see grandmothers on roller skates. But even on the sunniest day, you sense that this comic version of LA is dated. This summer, you get the sense that the old American dream of the city is dying. Something even older is reasserting itself. Los Angeles is becoming more apparently a Mexican city again. At the same time, the city is becoming what it never was in the blonde sitcoms and MGM musicals. Los Angeles is becoming an immigrant city. A new myth of the city will be created not by Americans arriving from Kansas so much as by immigrants arriving from Korea. I'm Richard Rodriguez.
Again, the main stories of this Friday, the European community held another round of Yugoslav peace talks, but the meeting ended after the Bosnian government refused to participate. NATO officials backed away from the immediate use of force in Bosnia. The alliance said it needed at least 10 days to consider the range of options. And this evening, White House spokesman Marlin Fitzwater announced that the United States will soon begin emergency airlifts of food to Somalia. The action is aimed at alleviating widespread starvation in the East African nation. Good night, Robin.
Good night, Judy. A reminder that next week the NewsHour team will be in Houston, site of the Republican convention. After the NewsHour itself, our special PBS-NBC joint coverage will begin on most of these PBS stations at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday. I'm Robert MacNeil. Have a nice weekend. Good night.
Funding for the MacNeil, Lehrer, and NewsHour.
One parent claimed his child had become nervous with a black teacher. The school principal asked the student his feelings.
Glenn came in, and the principal said, Glenn, your father brought you here, and he says you're nervous when you go home. No, I'm not nervous, said Mr. Ford is my teacher, and I like Mr. Ford.
He taught first in elementary schools, then at Roosevelt High School. He was named Teacher of the Year. Former students placed a plaque in his honor at Martin Luther King Center. A lot can happen in a man's life.
I have always felt that I could do whatever I made up my mind to do.
He knew that as a young man, looking at his successful older brother and sisters.
And there I was with hardly anything, and I just... I guess I'm too sentimental. But nevertheless, I just felt that, well, hell, I just got to do something. And I kept hanging in there and doing the very best I could. And I made a lot of mistakes.
It is all part of the book of his life.
I don't know. I have no regrets for the kind of life I have lived because I try not to hold malice toward anybody. And I just do the best I can.
Ray Summers at large.
A lot of history there. This month, Mr. Ford celebrates his 86th birthday.
86 years is a long time. For those of you who'd like to just look 5 days into the future, Heidi's going to allow us to do that right now.
And we are going to look for some cooler weather starting for us tomorrow, as early as tomorrow. In fact, we'll be in the 80s tomorrow, 70s by Wednesday, and maybe even some showers Thursday and Friday. That's going to sound and feel very, very good. The clouds are just going to feel good after all the sunshine
Long
we've
time
had.
since it's rained here. Well, we had the one day a couple weeks
Right,
ago.
but it'll feel really nice just to get a little cooler.
We need some measurable rain. Join us tonight at 11.